So last weekend I was up at Caddo Lake in Northeast Texas. It's a huge lake that gets over into Louisiana as well, but it's full of these cypress trees and a bunch of swamps. And it's really interesting and beautiful and kind of unique. I had some friends that were running a workshop there. They asked me to come along and help a little bit and of course take photos. So what I'm going to be working on today, what I want to do is really just share some tips about how you can adjust the light and color to really make an impactful image from something that may have looked a little bit flat to start. Here's my image. I'm in Luminar Neo today. That's my base image, and this is my final image. And as you can see, I've done a lot here to really adjust the light and the color, which is really kind of the key things I want to do in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and pop on over to edit, and we'll jump in and develop this photo and get that final result. Okay, speaking of develop, I start in develop raw because I always shoot raw, and I recommend shooting raw. More detail, more leeway in manipulating the photo. I'm going to start in the camera profile section. I don't really talk about these that much, but I was kind of playing around and I came across camera light, and I really like what that did to the photo. I tend to underexpose most of the time when I'm shooting. This is an example of that. And the camera light gave it a little bit of bump, which I liked, but of course I'm not done. There's quite a bit I'm going to do to this photo, and I'm going to walk through and share all of those kind of things here so that you can hopefully pick up some tips that you can use on your own images. Now the blacks I'm going to pull down a little bit because one of the cool things about this scene is that it's just got a lot of shadow, and I don't want to lose the shadow. I want to amp up the colors and adjust the light, but only in certain areas. I want to keep shadow because it adds a little bit of that mood or that drama to the scene. So I want to ensure that I keep that and basically enhance it as well. I am going to warm this up a little bit. I'm going to go 4718, and then my vibrance is like a 4. So I don't want to do much there, and maybe like a 20-25 on sharpening. I don't need transform or anything else, but if you look at my before and my after, you can see I've already made a significant amount of progress on the image. Now, you may know if you've been here before that I really like to go into super contrast second, and that's just because it does so much for me in terms of managing the light. And I always start out really just looking at the light, especially an image like this that starts out so dark. I want to get the light adjusted the way I want the light to look without giving up all the shadow, but I want to brighten some certain areas. And the super contrast tool just does wonders for me in terms of kind of getting my edit going in the right direction. I'm going to go ahead and bump shadows up about 28, 29. If you look at the before and the after, it may not seem significant to you, but it's definitely a little bit more contrast. And the contrast gives, I think, depth and creates a little bit of pop in the image. You may also notice that now the colors are starting to come alive, right? Obviously the photo is going to be a lot brighter, but the colors are starting to pop a bit. And part of that is because of super contrast. It's one of the reasons I like to use it, and that's another reason why I use it early in the process, because contrast adjustments will make colors look different. And now that I've done that, I do want to go into color. Color for me in the swamps, there's like some nice golds and orangey kind of yellows and greens. And then there's a whole lot of like gray, we'll call it, like this Spanish moss hanging, the tree trunks, a lot of that is kind of just a lot more muted kind of look, but I want to amp up those colors. And one of the things I really like to do is go into HSL. And that's, as you can see here, Hue, Saturation, and Luminance allows you to adjust each of those three parts, if you will, of any particular color. I'm going to start with orange, and what I want to do is take this hue, and I'm going to go to about a -20, and in yellow, I'm going to go to about a -30. Now what that's doing is basically just shifting the orange and the yellow both towards a richer version of that color. The orange is going to become more intensely orange, and the yellow is going to go closer to orange and away from yellow, and therefore away from green. You can kind of see it's color coded on these individual lines, and they kind of brighten when you hover over them. You can kind of see that I'm going yellow more towards a light orange, and the orange more towards a kind of orangey red. But if you look at the before and the after, a little bit more intense. The next thing I want to do though is get a little bit of saturation. I want to pop those oranges because, as you saw in the final result, it really stands out. And a way to do that, of course, is coming into HSL just to control that overall look. So I'm going to do something about like that with the saturation. And now I'm going to pop into luminance, because luminance is a way to bring this to life. And I'm going to go to like a 35, 36, 37, just in the orange to really brighten that up. So now if you look at the colors before a lot more muted. The color was there and it was coming to life. I brightened the photo, and then of course with super contrast, it creates a little bit more color pop. But now that I'm playing with color, I went from that to that, which is really making it stand out. And in particular, the oranges are standing out. And this is something I talk about in a lot of videos, and that is when you're playing with color, pick like a color that you really want to accentuate. Don't pick all the colors, because if I really pop the yellow and I really pop the green and I pop the orange, everything starts showing up. Whereas now, if you look like back in the distance, you can see these little pops of orange there and over in there. So if you look at before, it's a lot more muted, and now it's standing out a lot more. So it's picking that key color and kind of honing in on it and just creating a lot more intensity around that one color to make it stand out. The other thing I think makes a difference here is because it's a bright color and kind of obviously a warm color because it's orange, it's going to stand out more against that darker background that's a little bit more, it's not really blue, but we're going to do something to accentuate that in a minute. But being darker, it's kind of cooler. So I'm creating that color contrast, which makes that image pop a bit more. So I'm going to go into mystical next, and that's really just because I love mystical. It adds a little bit of romantic lighting, but it deepens that shadow, and it creates a little bit more intensity around the color too. So before and after, just a little bit use of mystical across the entire photo just creates that contrast, and I think accentuates the overall feeling for what I'm doing here. Now, I mentioned color, and I'm going to go into color harmony, but I'm not going to do things like brilliance and warmth or split color warmth. I'm just going to go into color balance, and I'm just going to go into the shadows. And all I want to do is take the yellow blue toward the blue. So I'm going to go to about an 8, and I'm doing that just in the shadows. So what I'm doing is using the blue to basically darken the shadows. And the shadows in the background, it was accentuated a little bit with mystical, the last tool, but now going into just the shadows component of color balance and moving the yellow blue over to the blue, I'm just saying, hey shadows, get bluer. Blue is a darker color and a cooler color. So it's darker, it's going to contrast more with the bright in the orange and yellow, but it's also a cooler color, which is going to contrast with the warmth in the leaves. So you can see before and after just creates a little bit more of that without really making it blue. I'm just essentially darkening the shadow area by making them a little bit more blue. So these are the things when you're manipulating color and light that I like to think about. The warm colors and the cool colors, play them off of each other. Warm is usually brighter, cool is usually darker. And so just kind of playing off of those to create color contrast and light contrast in the image. That's a way, and one of the key tips that I like to use to do that. Now, I do want to pop that area around the center of the photo, and Accent AI is great at that, but it's really important that you control Accent AI with a mask. I generally will use it with a radial gradient. For some reason, those two just kind of go together for me, but you could use a linear or a brush. I would probably most of the time, I use radial gradient, and I just kind of prefer that. So where I want this radial gradient is, of course, in the center part of the photo. And all I'm going to do here is kind of create the mask and just kind of manipulating this until I kind of get it looking the way I want it to look. One thing that I'm a big fan of is having this generous gradient zone. And I talk about that in a lot of videos where I'm using masking. And all it's going to do is create a more gentle and kind of transitional fade between the area in the center of this kind of oval shape, which is going to get 100% of the adjustment. And then from this center kind of oval shape to the outer oval shape, that transitional zone is basically where you fade the effect into the rest of the photo. In other words, instead of being an abrupt transition, it smooths across the photo and creates a little bit more gentle look to that adjustment. So I'm going to do something about like that, and I'm going to come in with like a 26, 28, something like that. All I'm doing, creating a little bit more intensity there in the middle of the photo. So if you look at the before and the after, you'll notice I did it wrong. I forgot to invert the mask. So I'm going to come back over here, and if you go to Mask Actions and click on Show, you'll see I completely forgot to invert the mask. And I've asked the Skyloom team, please just make the default the inside, and then if we want to do the outside, we can do that. Maybe someday they'll do that, but that's a key thing when you're using a radial gradient. If you're trying to get it inside, invert the mask. I forgot to do that because I'm making a video and sometimes it's hard to keep track of where I am. So I'm going to click Invert. There we go. Now I got a nice little pop of color and light in that area, which is covered by that kind of pinkish red mask overlay. So that's looking pretty nice, and that's a key way to really pop that area, before and after. And it makes it look like some light is coming through the trees in the swamp here to really land on that spot. I think that looks pretty nice. Now, the other thing I want to do is, it's really dark in the bottom, and that's a swamp, and I don't know how deep it was. It's not super deep, maybe 4 or 5 feet or something, but it's really dark, and I've created a little bit more darkness because remember, I added blue to the shadows. But what's missing is it's too bright at the top of the image, so I'm going to go into the masking and get a linear gradient. And again, this is just manipulating and controlling the light so that I take control of my photo and I get what I want to get, right? Which is what I'm editing for in the first place. And what I want to do is also create that transitional zone where you fade the effect into the rest of the photo. And here I'm going to do something like a -1. So basically darkening that by about 1 stop. So let's go, about like that. And all it's doing is just creating a little bit of a gentle fade of darker at the top, and it fades into that area that I brightened with Accent AI. So I'm just controlling the light, because if you look at the before, it's just too bright up there, and the trees up here, these leaves that are kind of green and yellow with a little bit of orange, before they're just too bright, and it's a little bit distracting to me visually. And after, I think it looks much better. I'm kind of fading that darkness into the rest of the photo, just so that I can have a little bit darker top and kind of frame the image, where a little bit darker at the top, of course it's kind of dark at the bottom, and it's kind of bright in the center. Now, having done that, I'm going to go into Structure AI, and I'm going to go into Masking, and I'm going to go into Brush, and I'm going to drop my strength to 65, let's call it. And all I want to do is get a little bit bigger brush, and I'm just going to come over here, and I'm just going to paint into some of these areas. And you can see I'm just kind of squiggling, is that a word? Squiggling my brush around across some of these trees and some of these areas, and all I'm adding is just a little bit of structure. So maybe something about like that, and I'm going to do like, I think mid-30s, so 35, 36, and all I'm doing is creating a little bit more texture in those areas, a little bit of crunch, and that's what Structure AI does so well. You'll also notice if you look at the before and the after, it's hard to see here because I'd used a lower strength brush and I don't have a huge amount, but Structure AI also slightly brightens the area that you painted across. So I think it's important in probably just about every photo, unless it's a really grungy like urbex kind of thing. Just about every time I'm going to be using a mask with Structure AI so that it controls it, because it does brighten it in addition to adding that little bit of crunch. Anyway, there you go, before and after, a little bit more of that intensity, which I like. And then I'm going to go get the erase. There's a couple of things in the water. There's a little reflection here, but you can't see what it's reflecting from. So I want to remove that. It's a little bit distracting, and there's some white spots down here. I'm going to remove them as well, because I want that foreground to be dark and just be reflecting the color. Okay, I erased those. They were just a little bit distracting to me. I don't want anything bright down there. And it might have been like reflections of some of the light coming through the trees, and that one thing up here might have been a little bit of a stick, but I can't really see the stick that would be reflecting. If you can see what's being reflected easily, like this line right here appears to be that stick, I don't want to erase that, because then you might say the reflection looks off. But little pockets of light coming through, I think take those out, and I think that works. And the last thing is really just a vignette. So I just want to come in here and I want to add a little bit of vignette, a tiny bit of inner light, maybe just a 3 or 4. I don't want to overdo it. I definitely like a little bit rounder vignette, and I like a high feather on the vignette. And it defaults to the center of the photo being the center of the vignette. You can move that around if you want. Just click on Choose Subject, and then you can sort of audition different spots by clicking around in the photo. I don't really need to do that. Maybe I'll put it right over here. I think something about like that, kind of on that branch, because that's also where the inner light is going to come from, because that's the center of the vignette. So if I crank up the inner light, you can see that it's getting really high. I don't want to overdo it. I've already done a few things to kind of brighten that center section, but just a slight touch, maybe a 3 on inner light and a slight vignette to further darken the edges. And that's my whole edit. That's a lot of different things you can do. and the tools you can use to accomplish really adjusting light and shadow and color to get an impactful image, even if you start with something that's a little bit flat. And again, this was underexposed a little bit, but I was able to brighten it, use contrast tools, use things like HSL in the color tool, use mystical, use structure, use accent AI, and with mask, things like that to really get an impactful image. And now you got a nice pop of color over here, some orange coming through, all in the center, of course, and down here, and then over here, and brightened up some of the orange as well, even though I darkened some of those areas. I think overall, I've got an image I really like, to be honest. This is, I think, a beautiful photo, but before and after, that's how this one went. Hope those tips help you in editing your own images. And thanks for watching, my friends. I'll be back soon with another video. And until next time, you guys take care, and adios.